Okay, I have to turn on my little bean. I have to get my bean knitting. This app, Hank Green created it. It's called Focus Friend. You get a little bean, you get to name him. I named mine Garbanzo, and he needs to knit. His socks and scarves are currency. And his empty house, yeah, I need to use those socks and scarves to get him a beautiful home. So let's focus. What are we gonna do? We're gonna do 40 minutes because this is probably gonna take me a little while. He's about to, look at his little butt! Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Steph and I'm here to talk to you about some horror reads, some of my favorite horror reads. I did a video 2 years ago, probably, this video, where I talked to you about my favorite horror reads. At the time of making that video, I had only been reading horror for a year, so now it's been 3 years, which I would say out of all of the genres that I read, this is the one that I feel like I'm the most attuned to, because everything on this list is between a 4 and 5 star. I don't really rate books unless it's a 5 star at this point in time, but some of these I read previous to me stopping rating books. I have 8 books on this list. These are not in any particular order, and these 8 aren't necessarily the only horror books that I've loved over the years, but they're the ones that stick with me. They're the ones that I've bought copies of because I like them so much and I will probably reread them. I will say right off the bat, I'm someone who really likes grief horror. Most of my horror is very sad. It is dealing with grief, it's dealing with racism, it's dealing with social topics, so like grief and social horror really work for me. However, slashers and like really gory horror usually don't work for me. So I think that's a good indicator of what you're gonna see on this list, and pretty much all of them fall under that, to be honest. Starting with Bat Eater and Other Names for Khorazang. This is one of the newer ones that has made it to my list, and I ended up giving this 5 stars. When I finished it, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to give it, and then it just ate at me. It sat with me, it continued living in my brain. I couldn't stop thinking about this book. I actually went into like a very small reading slump after I finished this book because I couldn't stop thinking about it. And this is one that I hesitate to recommend to people because it is a pandemic book. This is set at the very start of the pandemic, and our main character sees her sister brutally murdered, and the murder was very racially motivated. And so throughout the book, she thinks a lot about her sister. She thinks a lot about the racism within COVID. They're kind of experiencing COVID throughout the book. She eventually becomes someone who is part of a crime scene cleanup crew, and this crew begins to notice a trend within the murders. And so there's a little bit of a murder mystery, there's a little bit of grief, there's a little bit of ghosts, and there is a bit of humor in here. And honestly, thank God for the humor, because I think it meshed so well with the overall tone of this book in general and like the messaging within this book. The characters are phenomenal. They're so well realized. Even side characters are so extremely well realized. I really enjoyed getting to know our main character, but also getting to know her 2 best friends who are very like important to the overall plot, and they also bring a lot of humor into the story. One of the books that made it on this list that I was not expecting is Patricia Wants to Cuddle. And I think a big part of that is because this book heavily is influenced by reality television. As a matter of fact, the reason they go to the island where they end up meeting Patricia and all of the horrific stuff starts to happen is because they're on a reality television show. And so the various characters in here are not good characters. They're like horrible people for the most part, because all they want is to be famous and on television. So they do pretty messed up things to one another, but they go on this island and they start dying kind of one by one. The one thing I will say, the horror elements take their time. This is a slow burn book, but it is very campy. It is very slashery, so that's another reason why this was so out of the norm for me, because it's very gory, it's very slashy, it's definitely one of those campy horror movie vibes, but something about the reality television aspect and the way that the characters were just so reminiscent of, you know, the villains that you've seen on TV, like reality television. And also the overall humor and just weirdness of this book really worked for me. I laughed out loud a lot, and it just ended up becoming wildly entertaining. It was just super entertaining. Stephen Graham Jones made it to the list once again. I can't say that he does no wrong in my eyes, because I've read quite a few things by him at this point, and while I enjoy most everything that he writes, not everything is a favorite. But this this one really hits. This one definitely leans into the grief horror that I'm talking about. There's a young boy, I think he's 15 years old, and he thinks he sees the ghost of his father in Blackfeet regalia, and this really scares him. He's not really sure why his father would be visiting him and why his father would be visiting him in his regalia, and he's kind of trying to solve the mystery of like, is his father sort of stuck on the other side? The discoveries within this book are very heart-wrenching, and it's very grief forward, but as you can see, I annotated a lot. I highly recommend if you're already a fan of Stephen Graham Jones and you haven't read this for whatever reason, but I also highly recommend if you haven't read Stephen Graham Jones and you kind of want to dive into some of his works. I do think a novella is always a nice place to start with a horror author. I also loved Bad Cree. This one has pretty mixed reviews, again, because it is a grief horror, and so it focuses a lot on the grief rather than like the really scary parts. But our main character, Mackenzie, she pulls a bird's head out of her dream, so she thinks. But when she wakes up, she realizes it's an illusion. However, every night she seems to have this recurring dream that's leading her to the scene of where her sister died one night at their cabin. And she's not sure if this is just her brain trying to cope with grief or if her sister is trying to tell her something. So she goes on a journey to kind of figure out, why are these nightmares happening and why is it so scary and why does it seem like my sister is trying to send me a message? So she's really trying to work through her grief about her sister, but she also has a lot of family grief. Her family and her are very broken at the start of this book, and she has to kind of reconnect with them. So ultimately, these dreams are beginning to be a danger to herself. So there's a lot of like grief and healing with your family and healing your trauma. And of course, I really enjoyed it, but I don't think that the horror is like the most top tier slashery, super scary, but I find these things to be very terrifying. Florine is one that I would constitute as like a weird girl horror because we are following a teenager. She's a teenager who's like a swimming prodigy. She swims in high school and her coach is weird. He's a weirdo, but she is very obsessed with swimming. She's very obsessed with being an athlete. She's very obsessed about her body. And she's also very obsessed with her best friend. So this has like a little bit of a gay awakening moment and queer longing in it. But there's also a lot of discussions about racism and immigrating to America and the fetishization of Asian women. And so our main character, Rin, I think being a teenager is very important because we are seeing her kind of go through the realizations about the American dream and about being Asian in America and racism in America. And like she is coping with that the only way that she kind of knows how within this book. And that is getting obsessed with sports and being a swimmer and like being obsessed with her body because those are the things that she can control. But it gets really weird and really messy, and there is a literal scene in here that made me gag. I do think that this is also slow burn though. I think this constitutes as a slow burn horror because a lot of it is just leading up to the eventual spiral of this character. These last three books that I'm going to talk about have been like my favorite horror books for the last at least year, if not longer. I love these. I recommend these all the time. I actually was awarded the name the Spooky Librarian by one of my patrons, as in I'm a librarian, like in my actual job as a librarian, and the patrons that come into the library. She started coming in on Saturdays and she would ask me for horror recommendations, and I have recommended all three of these books to her, and she's loved all three of them, which has been like wonderful. So she always comes in and asks me for horror recommendations, and then her wife informed me that she has dubbed me the Spooky Librarian. So if you're curious what I got my name from, it's these three. First one being Monstrilio, and I have no one but Kayla to thank for this because she invited me to the Literally Dead book club, and prior to that I had like heard about Monstrilio, but it wasn't really on my radar to read anytime soon. Then I read it for her book club and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 stars immediately. I think that if you read Our Share of Night, this book here, this was everything that I wanted Our Share of Night to be, which Our Share of Night is still a good book, but it was too long for what I wanted. But all of the things that I loved in that book condensed into this book and done amazingly. I loved loved the writing in here, and I loved the characters, and I loved the grief. This one is interesting because this is more about mother's grief and family's grief, because a mother loses her youngest son and she refuses to let him go, so she buries his lung in his backyard, and in comes our creature Monstrilio, our monster Monstrilio, who then takes on the life of the son that she lost. But there's something monstrous and off about Monstrilio, and we get to see from 4 different perspectives in this book the raising of Monstrilio, the losing him and then raising him. And it's very fascinating. It's very fascinating. There is a lot of queer longing in here as well. And there's a lot of grief, and there's a lot of like, what did we do? Then you also see the perspective from Monstrilio, kind of exploring like what it means to be alive for him and to be this monstrous creature who has these monstrous urges. I loved it. I loved it so much. I think another reason I really love this is I love Frankenstein, and this gives a little bit of those Frankenstein vibes, you know? But it's also just fascinating to see grief from multiple perspectives, and I haven't read a lot of books where the grief is like a mother's grief and a father's grief, and then also the grief from the perspective of the person who was supposed to die. But I also think this is a slow burn, and this is not going to be as scary as you think. There are horrific moments, but it's not going to be as scary as you think. I keep giving that warning because I don't want anyone to go into these being like, ooh, I'm going to be super creeped out. I really don't think you are, but I think it's going to make you uncomfortable. I like that feeling. I love the feeling of being uncomfortable and like something pushing my boundaries or pushing my limits in a horror book, or like a weird girl fiction book or a weird girl horror book. Just something that makes me very viscerally uncomfortable, have visceral reactions to it. That's what I like in horror. And usually my visceral reactions don't come from slashers and stuff, because I just don't like it. It doesn't do anything for me. But like the uncomfortability of just human nature. Also, something that I love about this book is there is a drawing of what Monstrilio is supposed to look like. And honestly, I love him. This is probably what Labubus were inspired by. Is this the inspiration for a Labubu? Just let me know down below. Natural Beauty. This is also, I would constitute as like a weird girl horror. This one goes a little bit hard on the weird. Okay, this is about the beauty industry, but it's specifically about racism and whitewashing in the beauty industry, and I found it extremely fascinating. Our main character gets into this like major beauty company, and she's really obsessed with one of the owners, or slash the daughter of the owner. I can't remember what her full relationship within the company is, like how she's like integrated into the company, but she's very high up in the company, and our main character becomes obsessed with her. But then our main character starts to see the cracks within the foundation of this industry in general, but also this company, and it gets very bizarre. It gets very bizarre. It gets very fever dreamy. I mean, I'm talking like Bunny from Mona Awad fever dreamy. It gets weird. It gets visceral. It gets a little nasty. This one, I think, probably leans more into like the weird horror than maybe anything else on this list. It's creepy. It's weird. And I loved it. Lastly, I've talked about this book so often, Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. This is sapphic yearning, sapphic obsession. 2 women become obsessed with each other, and it spirals out of control. I just want to give you very little about this book because I think that that's the best way to go into it. The one thing I'll say is you're probably going to predict a lot of what happens in this book, but you are not going to predict exactly how it ends. And even if you do, it's still fucking wild. It's so wild. It's so wild and creepy, okay? And it's sapphic yearning and obsession at its best. And that, I'm going to leave it at that because this is my agenda. This is my Roman Empire. And I need more people to read it, but also if you hate it, just don't tell me. You don't need to tell me. I think I got through that faster than I even expected. Let's see how our bean is doing. We have 17 minutes left. I did well. I did okay. I'm still gonna go through that 17 minutes because I need whatever that bean has knitted. I need it. Okay, I'll see y'all later. Also, if you want to leave an emoji down below, leave the bean emoji down below. And I'll talk to you later. Bye, friends.